The evening air carried a slight chill as Tanya Williams drove home from Jefferson Elementary, where she had spent the last 3 hours in a faculty meeting about the upcoming school year. Streetlights cast long shadows across her tired face. As she checked the time, 9:47 p.m. Too late for a school night, she thought, especially with lesson plans still waiting at home. Tanya adjusted the radio, letting soft jazz fill the car as she turned onto Maple Avenue. The familiar route home was almost empty at this hour, just a few cars scattered along the 4-lane road. After 12 years of teaching 3rd grade, these late meetings had become part of her routine, though she never quite got used to the exhaustion that followed them. Her mind wandered to tomorrow's science lesson about the water cycle when flashing blue and red lights suddenly filled her rearview mirror. Tanya's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't been speeding, had she? She signaled and pulled over to the shoulder, her hands automatically following the routine her father had taught her as a teenager. Turn off the engine, put the keys on the dashboard, hands at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel, window halfway down. Just be polite, stay calm, she whispered to herself, watching in the side mirror as a figure emerged from the patrol car. The officer took his time approaching, his flashlight beam bouncing across her trunk before landing directly in her eyes. Through the side mirror, Officer Robert Harlow had been with the department for 8 years. He'd started his shift angry after an argument with his ex-wife about child support payments, and the feeling had only festered during a quiet patrol night. He approached the blue sedan with his hand already resting on his holster, a habit his supervisor had warned him about twice in performance reviews. "License and registration," he barked, standing slightly behind the driver's window, his flashlight beam still aimed at Tanya's face. "Good evening, officer," Tanya replied, squinting against the light. "May I reach for my purse to get my license? It's on the passenger seat." Something in Harlow's expression hardened. "I said license and registration," he repeated, his voice taking on a sharper edge. Tanya nodded, moving slowly as she reached for her purse. "I'm just getting my wallet now," she narrated, keeping her movements deliberate and visible. The sudden movement of Harlow drawing his weapon happened so quickly that Tanya barely registered it until she was staring down the barrel of his service pistol. "Hands where I can see them. Now!" he shouted, his voice echoing in the quiet street. Tanya froze, her fingers inches from her purse. Cold fear washed over her as she slowly raised her hands back to the steering wheel. "My hands are up," she said, struggling to keep her voice steady. "They're right here on the wheel." "You were reaching," Harlow shouted, his gun still aimed at her head. "What were you reaching for?" "Just my license like you asked for," Tanya replied, her mouth dry. "My wallet is in my purse on the passenger seat. I was telling you that's what I was doing." Harlow's flashlight beam swept across the interior of the car, landing on her phone in the center console. "What's that? Were you recording me?" His voice took on a new tone, paranoid and threatening. "No, sir. That's just my phone. I wasn't touching it." "Step out of the vehicle," Harlow demanded, taking a step back. Tanya felt her chest tighten. "Officer, have I done something wrong? I don't understand why—" "I said get out of the car." Harlow cut her off, his voice rising. "Now!" A car drove past slowly, its passengers watching the scene unfold. Tanya noticed Harlow glance briefly at the passing vehicle before returning his attention to her. "I'm going to open my door very slowly," Tanya said, trying to keep her voice from shaking. "I'm not making any sudden movements." As she carefully pushed the door open, Tanya's mind raced through possibilities. She had taken a wrong turn into a nightmare. What had started as a routine traffic stop had escalated without reason or warning. "Turn around and put your hands on the roof," Harlow ordered as she stepped out, her legs feeling unsteady beneath her. Tanya complied, the metal of her car roof cool against her palms. She was acutely aware of the gun still pointed at her back. "What's the problem, officer?" she asked again, staring at her own reflection in the car window. In it, she could see Harlow's agitated movements behind her. "You people always think you can question everything," Harlow muttered, just loud enough for her to hear. "Always think the rules don't apply to you." The words hit Tanya like a physical blow. You people. She had heard those words before, had prepared herself for the possibility of hearing them again, but nothing quite readied you for the actual moment. "Sir, I'm just trying to understand why I've been pulled over," she said carefully. "I don't believe I was speeding or breaking any traffic laws." Harlow moved closer, his breath hot on her neck. "Your taillight is out, and I don't appreciate your attitude." Tanya bit back the response that rose to her lips. Her car had just passed inspection last month. There was no way she had a taillight out. But arguing would only make things worse. "I wasn't aware of that." "Thank you for letting me know," she said instead. A new set of headlights turned onto the street, slowing as they approached the scene. Tanya recognized the distinct shape of another police cruiser and felt a complicated mix of relief and apprehension. Harlow noticed it too. He lowered his weapon slightly but didn't holster it. "Everything okay here, Rob?" a female voice called as another officer approached, her hand resting casually on her belt. Officer Lin Chen had been with the department for 5 years. She'd worked with Harlow before and had witnessed his escalations firsthand. "Got a traffic? Stop. Broken taillight. Subject was being uncooperative," Harlow replied, his tone suddenly professional. Chen's flashlight swept over Tanya, taking in her button-up blouse and sensible slacks, clothes clearly coming from a professional workplace. "Ma'am, are you all right?" Chen asked, her voice neutral but her eyes sharp. "I'm very frightened," Tanya admitted, her hands still flat against the roof of her car. "I was pulled over and suddenly had a gun pointed at me. I still don't understand what I did wrong." Chen glanced at Harlow, whose expression had hardened into a mask. "Why don't we all take a breath?" Chen suggested, stepping closer to Tanya. "Ma'am, do you have your license and registration?" "In my purse, on the passenger seat," Tanya replied, her voice steadier now that another officer was present. "I was reaching for it when Officer Harlow drew his weapon." Chen nodded and looked at Harlow. "I can get it if you want to run her plates." Harlow hesitated, then holstered his weapon with visible reluctance. "Fine, I'll run the plates." As Harlow walked back to his cruiser, Chen approached Tanya more closely. "You can put your arms down, ma'am," she said quietly. "Mind if I get your license?" Tanya nodded, slowly lowering her arms, which had begun to ache from being held up. "Thank you." Chen retrieved Tanya's purse and handed it to her. "Get what you need." With trembling fingers, Tanya pulled out her wallet and handed over her license and insurance card. Chen examined them briefly. "Ms. Williams, I see you're a teacher at Jefferson Elementary." "Yes. 3rd grade. I was heading home from a late faculty meeting." Chen nodded, her expression softening slightly. "My niece goes there. 2nd grade with Ms. Patterson." "Diane's a wonderful teacher," Tanya replied automatically, the normalcy of the conversation feeling surreal after the terror of moments. Before Chen handed the documents back. "Wait here a moment, please." Tanya watched as Chen walked over to where Harlow was sitting in his cruiser. Though she couldn't hear their conversation, the tense body language told her enough. Chen gestured several times toward Tanya, while Harlow sat rigidly in his seat. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only a few minutes, both officers returned. "Ms. Williams," Chen began, "your record is clean. Officer Harlow is issuing you a warning about your taillight. You'll want to get that fixed within the next 48 hours. Tanya nodded, knowing full well there was nothing wrong with her taillight. This was face-saving, nothing more. "Thank you, officer," she replied. Harlow thrust a yellow warning slip toward her without making eye contact. "Sign here," he muttered. Tanya took the clipboard and signed where indicated, then handed it back. Their fingers didn't touch. "Am I free to go?" she asked, directing the question to Chen. "Yes, ma'am. Drive safely," Chen replied. Tanya got back into her car, her legs nearly buckling as the adrenaline that had been keeping her upright began to ebb. She placed her hands on the steering wheel and took several deep breaths before starting the engine. In her rearview mirror, she could see Chen and Harlow still standing by the road, engaged in what appeared to be a heated discussion. She pulled away carefully, maintaining exactly the speed limit. It wasn't until she was 3 blocks away that she allowed herself to acknowledge what had happened. Her hands began to shake so badly that she had to pull over into the parking lot of a closed convenience store. "Oh my God," she whispered, pressing her forehead against the steering wheel. "Oh my God." Her phone chimed with a notification, and she glanced at it, suddenly remembering the emergency recording feature her brother had insisted she set up. The screen displayed a simple message: "Emergency recording saved." Tanya stared at it for a long moment, her mind racing with implications. The entire encounter, from Harlow's initial approach to his slurs and threatening behavior, would be there. His words, his actions, the gun pointed at her head for no reason except. She reached for the phone with still trembling fingers and placed it in her lap. Not here. Not now. She needed to get home first, to be somewhere safe before she decided what to do next. The drive home was a blur, her body on autopilot, while her mind replayed the incident on a loop. By the time she pulled into her driveway, a decision had begun to form in her mind. This wasn't just about her. It wasn't even just about tonight. It was about every person who looked like her who might be pulled over by Harlow in the future. People who might not have a second officer arrive, who might not have a recording feature on their phone, who might make the wrong move in a moment of fear. As Tanya unlocked her front door, she knew what her next step would be. One phone call. That's all it would take to start the process. A process that would eventually lead to consequences that Officer Harlow never anticipated when he flipped on his lights behind her car. Tanya's hands were still shaking as she locked her front door behind her. She leaned against it for a moment, eyes closed, trying to steady her breathing. The house was quiet except for the soft ticking of the kitchen clock and the distant hum of the refrigerator, ordinary sounds that suddenly felt precious after what she'd just experienced. She dropped her purse and keys on the entry table and walked straight to her living room, sinking into the worn blue armchair that had belonged to her grandmother. Only then did she allow herself to look at her phone. The emergency recording app glowed on her screen, a small red icon showing that a file had been saved. Her brother Anthony had insisted she install it 3 years ago after a family friend had been wrongfully arrested during a traffic stop. Just in case, he'd told her. These days, your word against an officer's isn't enough. At the time, she'd thought he was being paranoid. Now she was grateful for his foresight. Tanya pressed play, turning up the volume. The first sounds were muffled. Her phone had been in her jacket pocket when she'd activated the recording with the voice command as soon as she saw the police lights. She heard herself pulling over, the click of her turn signal, the car engine shutting off. Then came Officer Harlow's voice, harsh and demanding from the beginning. Hearing it again sent a chill through her body. She listened as the situation escalated, his tone growing more aggressive with each exchange. When he drew his gun, she could hear her own breathing quicken, the fear evident even in the recording. "You people always think you can question everything," Harlow's voice said clearly through the speaker. "Always think the rules don't apply to you." Tanya paused the recording, her throat tight. Those words, spoken with such casual contempt, confirmed what she had felt in that moment. This wasn't about a taillight, it never had been. She forced herself to continue listening as Officer Chen arrived. The change in Harlow's demeanor was striking, his voice immediately shifting to a professional tone. Without the recording, it would have been his word against hers. After the recording ended, Tanya sat in silence for several minutes. Her phone felt heavy in her hand, weighted with the evidence it contained. What should she do with it? The clock on her wall showed it was nearly 11 p.m. Too late to call Anthony, though she knew he'd want her to. Too late to make any decisions when her mind was still reeling from adrenaline and fear. She made herself a cup of chamomile tea, her mother's remedy for any crisis, and took a long shower, letting the hot water wash over her as if it could somehow cleanse away the memory of Harlow's gun pointed at her head. In bed, sleep refused to come. Tanya stared at the ceiling, replaying not just tonight's events but other stories she'd heard, from friends, from news reports, from her students' parents. Stories that ended much worse than hers had. By morning, she knew what she needed to. The sun was barely rising when Tanya called her brother. Anthony picked up on the third ring, his voice groggy with sleep. "Tanya? It's not even 6. What's wrong?" "I need your help," she said simply. "Something happened last night." As she recounted the events, Anthony's voice grew increasingly alert and concerned. She could picture him sitting up in bed, reaching for the notepad he always kept on his nightstand, a habit from his law school days. "You have it recorded?" he asked when she finished. "All of it?" "Yes, the app you made me download. It caught everything." Anthony was silent for a moment. That's significant, Tanya. You know that, right? Most people don't have evidence like this." "I know," she replied. "That's why I'm calling. What should I do with it?" "Do you want to pursue this?" Anthony asked carefully. "It's your decision. These things can get complicated, take time. There might be backlash." Tanya thought about her students, about the young black boys in her class who would someday be driving alone at night, about the parents who had shared their own stories of harassment during parent-teacher conferences, speaking in hushed voices about the talk they'd have to give their children soon. "Yes," she said firmly. "I want to pursue it." If it had been someone else, someone younger, someone without a recording, this could have ended very differently. "Okay," Anthony said, and she could hear the pride in his voice. "Then I'm going to connect you with someone. Her name is Diane Vasquez. She's a sergeant with internal affairs. We went to law school together before she decided to join the force. Instead, she's good people, Tanya. She'll take this seriously." "Will she?" Tanya couldn't keep the skepticism from her voice. "He's one of their own. Diane became a cop because she wanted to change things from the inside," Anthony assured her. "She's been fighting this battle longer than either of us. Trust me on this." After hanging up, Tanya made herself breakfast, toast and eggs that she barely tasted, and got ready for work. She had considered calling in sick, but the routine of her classroom felt like a lifeline today. Her students needed her, and right now, she needed them too. Their innocent questions, their laughter, their world where the biggest crisis was, a forgotten homework assignment. She was grading papers during her lunch break when her phone buzzed with a text from Anthony. "Diane's expecting your call. Here's her direct number." Tanya waited until after school when the last child had been picked up and the hallways were quiet. She sat at her desk, surrounded by bright posters about the water cycle and multiplication tables, and dialed the number. "Sergeant Vasquez," a crisp voice answered. "Hello, this is Tanya Williams. My brother Anthony said you'd be expecting my call." "Ms. Williams, yes," Vasquez replied, her tone warming slightly. "Anthony told me a little about your situation. I understand you had a concerning encounter with one of our officers last night." "Concerning doesn't begin to cover it," Tanya said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "He pulled me over for apparently no reason, drew his weapon without provocation, used racial slurs, and threatened me. And I have it all recorded." There was a brief silence on the other end. "You have a recording?" "Yes. The entire interaction." "That changes things," Vasquez said, and Tanya could hear papers rustling in the background. "Would you be willing to come in and file a formal complaint, bring the recording with you?" "Yes," Tanya replied without hesitation. "When?" "The sooner the better. Can you come today? I'll stay late." 3 hours later, Tanya sat in a small conference room at the police headquarters, feeling strangely calm as she handed her phone to Sergeant Vasquez. The sergeant was not what Tanya had expected, a compact woman with salt and pepper haircut, in a practical bob, wearing a pantsuit rather than a uniform, with kind eyes that missed nothing. "I'm going to make a copy of this file for our records," Vasquez explained. "Then we'll listen to it together, and I'll ask you some questions to clarify anything that isn't clear from the audio. Is that all right?" Tanya nodded. "I want to be sure of one thing first. What will happen to him?" Vasquez considered her words carefully. "I can't promise specific outcomes, but I can promise you this will be thoroughly investigated." "Based on what?" "Your brother told me. If the recording confirms your account, Officer Harlow will face serious consequences. This type of behavior violates multiple departmental policies and potentially the law." "He shouldn't be carrying a badge or a gun," Tanya said firmly. "If what you've described is accurate, I agree," Vasquez replied, meeting her gaze. "Let's listen." As the recording played through the small speaker on Vasquez's computer, Tanya watched the sergeant's expression change, from professional neutrality to a deepening frown. When Harlow's voice uttered the slur, Vasquez's jaw tightened visibly. After it ended, Vasquez sat back in her chair. "Ms. Williams, thank you for bringing this forward. I know it wasn't easy. Will there be other officers who back him up?" Tanya asked, "Who try to make this go away?" "There might be," Vasquez admitted. "But this recording makes that much harder. And you should know that Officer Chen already filed a report this morning noting her concerns about Harlow's behavior during—" "Stop, that's unusual. Officers don't often report each other." This surprised Tanya. "She did?" "Yes. She didn't have all the details you've provided, but she noted that his response seemed disproportionate and that she had concerns about his conduct. That, combined with your recording and statement, gives us a strong case." Tanya felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She wasn't alone in this. "What happens next?" she asked. "I'll file your formal complaint today. Officer Harlow will be placed on administrative leave immediately while we investigate. We'll review his body camera footage." "He never turned it on," Tanya interrupted. "I never saw the light." Vasquez nodded grimly. "That's another violation. Officers are required to activate their cameras during all civilian interactions. If he failed to do so, that's a serious issue on its own." She made a few notes before continuing. "We'll also review his previous complaints and conduct history. This investigation will be thorough, Ms. Williams, I promise you that." As Tanya signed her statement, she thought about how different this moment felt from the terror of the previous night. One phone call had set this process in motion. One recording had given her a voice that couldn't be dismissed or ignored. Walking to her car in the police headquarters parking lot, Tanya felt something unexpected, a sense of purpose. What had happened to her was terrible, but perhaps some good could come from it. Perhaps the next person Harlow pulled over would be spared because of the action she was taking today. She looked at her phone, the device that had captured what might otherwise have been dismissed as an exaggeration or a misunderstanding. Technology had given her power in a situation where she had felt powerless. As she drove home, the weight of the recording now in official hands, Tanya knew the process ahead would be difficult. There would be questions, possibly backlash, certainly scrutiny. But for the first time since seeing those flashing lights in her rearview mirror, she felt something like hope. The system might be flawed, but there were people within it, like Officer Chen and Sergeant Vasquez, who were trying to make it better. And now she was part of that effort too. The next 3 days passed in a strange blur for Tanya. She went through her teaching routine, helping third graders with multiplication tables, reading Charlotte's Web aloud after lunch, resolving a playground dispute about whose turn it was on the swings, all while carrying the weight of her decision inside her. She hadn't told anyone at school about the incident, not even her principal, whom she generally trusted. Something told her to wait, to let the process begin before sharing her story more widely. Wednesday afternoon, as her students filed out of the classroom, her phone buzzed with a text from Sergeant Vasquez. "Update available. Can you come in tomorrow?" Tanya typed back quickly. "After school, around 4:30? "Perfect," came the reply. Same room as before. That night, Tanya couldn't focus on her lesson plans. Her mind kept circling back to questions about what the update might be. Had they already spoken to Harlow? Had he denied everything? Was there a problem with her recording? She called Anthony, needing her brother's steadying presence. "They're moving quickly," he said after she told him about the meeting. "That's a good sign." "What if they try to sweep it under the rug?" she asked, voicing her deepest fear. "What if they found some technicality? Then we go to the media," Anthony replied without hesitation. "We have the recording, Tanya. That's not something they can easily dismiss. But let's not borrow trouble. Diane Vasquez is solid. Let's see what she has to say first." The next day crawled by. Tanya caught herself checking the clock every 15 minutes, her stomach tightening with each passing hour. When the final bell rang, she had to force herself to take time with her usual end-of-day tasks, straightening desks, erasing the whiteboard, updating the weather chart for tomorrow. Rushing would only leave her sitting anxiously in the police, Station parking lot. At exactly 4:30, Tanya knocked on the conference room door. Sergeant Vasquez opened it, looking more tired than she had a few days earlier. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, but she managed a small smile. "Ms. Williams, thank you for coming. Please have a seat." The conference room felt smaller somehow, its beige walls more oppressive. A folder lay on the table, substantially thicker than the one that had held Tanya's statement during their first meeting. "I want to update you on our investigation," Vasquez began, settling into her chair. "First Officer Harlow has been placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of our inquiry. He surrendered his badge and service weapon on Tuesday morning." Tanya nodded, feeling a strange mixture of relief and tension. "Has he responded to the complaint?" "Yes." Vasquez's expression hardened slightly. "He claims you were belligerent and made threatening movements. He denies using any racial language or pointing his weapon at you without cause. But the recording contradicts his statement completely," Vasquez interrupted gently. "Which is why we're proceeding with the investigation despite his denials." Tanya exhaled slowly. "So what happens now?" Vasquez opened the folder and spread several documents in front of her. "This is where things get complicated and frankly more disturbing." She tapped a paper with a list of dates and case numbers. "After receiving your complaint, I pulled Officer Harlow's personnel file and complaint history. In the past 3 years, he has had 7 civilian complaints filed against him." "7?" Tanya's eyes widened. "Yes. 4 for excessive force, 2 for verbal harassment, and 1 for improper search procedure. All of the complainants were people of color." Vasquez's voice had taken on a controlled anger. "All 7 complaints were dismissed for insufficient evidence. How is that possible? In each case, it came down to the civilian's word against the officers. There were no recordings, no witnesses willing to come forward, and this is key. Harlow's body camera footage was either malfunctioning or not activated." Tanya's stomach turned. "So he's done this before, multiple times." "It appears that way." Vasquez pulled out another document. "This is the technical report on his body camera from the night of your incident. According to the data log, the camera was manually deactivated 4 minutes before he initiated your traffic stop. That's a direct violation of department policy." The implications sank in. Harlow hadn't just forgotten to turn on his camera. He had deliberately turned it off before approaching her car. He had planned for there to be no record of whatever happened next. "There's more," Vasquez continued. "Officer Chen's statement corroborates key elements of your account. She reported that when she arrived, Harlow had his weapon drawn despite no apparent threat. She also noted that your demeanor was calm and cooperative, contradicting Harlow's claim that you were belligerent." Tanya thought back to Officer Chen's arrival, how the woman had assessed the situation quickly and de-escalated it. She'd been professional but kind, treating Tanya with basic respect, something that shouldn't have felt like a relief, but did. "Has Officer Chen faced any backlash for supporting my account?" Tanya asked suddenly. Vasquez's slight hesitation told Tanya everything before she even spoke. "There have been tensions. Some officers believe in protecting their own regardless of circumstances, but Chen is well respected and she's standing firm." Tanya nodded, a new worry forming. "What about me? Should I be concerned about retaliation? I wish I could tell you no," Vasquez said honestly. "But I won't lie to you. Officers like Harlow rarely go down quietly. That said, we're taking every precaution. Your name is being kept confidential in all but the required documentation. We've flagged your address in the system so that any calls involving your home will be monitored by a supervisor." She leaned forward. "And I've personally spoken with the patrol officers in your neighborhood. They understand the situation." The reality of what she had set in motion was starting to sink in for Tanya. This wasn't just about filing a complaint that would be processed and forgotten. This was challenging a system that sometimes protected its worst members at the expense of the public it was meant to serve. "I've been thinking about the other people who filed complaints," Tanya said slowly. "The ones who weren't believed." Vasquez nodded. "Your recording changes things for them too. We're reopening those cases as part of this investigation. Your evidence establishes a pattern that makes their accounts more credible. Tanya hadn't expected that. The thought that her single phone call, her one recording, might bring justice for others who'd encountered Harlow gave her a sense of purpose stronger than her fear. "What do you need from me now?" she asked. "For the moment, just patience," Vasquez replied. "The investigation is moving forward, but these things take time to do properly. I expect we'll need you to give a formal deposition next week." She paused. "There's something else you should consider, though it's entirely your decision." "What's that?" "The district attorney has reviewed your recording. Based on what's there, they believe there may be grounds for criminal charges against Harlow: assault with a deadly weapon, deprivation of civil rights under color of law, possibly even hate crime enhancements." Tanya hadn't expected this possibility. Criminal charges, not just losing his job? Yes. But pursuing that path would likely mean you'd have to testify in court, possibly face cross-examination. Your recording would become public record. Your name would become public. It's a different level of involvement and exposure. The conference room felt very quiet as Tanya absorbed this information. Criminal charges meant a public trial. It meant her face on the news, her name in newspapers. It meant scrutiny of her life, her past, her character. Because that's what defense attorneys did to witnesses who threatened their clients. "How long do I have to decide?" she asked finally. "A few days at least. The internal investigation will proceed regardless, but the DA would like to know your thoughts on criminal prosecution by early next week." Tanya nodded, trying to process everything. "I should talk to my brother." "Of course." Vasquez gathered the papers back into the folder. "For what it's worth, Ms. Williams, what you've done already takes tremendous courage. Whatever you decide about the criminal case, you've already made a difference. Officer Harlow won't be in a position to harm anyone else while wearing a badge, and that's because of you." As Tanya drove home, the weight of the decision ahead pressed on her. The reasonable, self-protective part of her brain argued for stepping back now. Let the department handle Harlow internally. Keep her name out of the papers. Avoid becoming a target for those who would inevitably take Harlow's side. But another voice spoke louder, the voice that had made her become a teacher in the first place. The voice that believed in standing up for what was right, even when it was difficult. The voice that reminded her of all those who had faced similar situations without the protection of a recording. At a red light, Tanya found herself thinking about her students again, especially Darius, a bright-eyed boy who'd recently told her he wanted to be a police officer when he grew up, to help people. What message would she send him by backing down now? Her phone rang through her car speakers. "Anthony." "Hey," she answered. "I was just going to call you." "How did the meeting go?" he asked. "It's bigger than we thought," she replied, and proceeded to explain everything Vasquez had told her. When she finished, Anthony was quiet for a moment. "So now you have to decide whether to support criminal charges." "Yes." "What would you do?" "That's not fair to ask, sis. I'm not the one who'd have to live with the consequences." "But I value your opinion," she insisted. "This isn't just about me anymore. There are other victims, people who weren't believed." "And that matters to you," Anthony said. It wasn't a question. "Of course it does." "Then I think you already know what you're going to do." Her brother replied gently. "You've never been one to walk away when someone needs help." That night, Tanya sat on her back porch, watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. The decision before her felt monumental, yet somehow, as Anthony had suggested, she already knew what she would choose. She thought about Officer Harlow, about the casual cruelty in his voice when he'd said, "You people." She thought about the 7 other complaints that had been dismissed, 7 other people who had walked away feeling powerless and unheard. She thought about Officer Chen, facing tensions because she'd done the right thing. About Sergeant Vasquez, working late nights to build a case that some of her colleagues no doubt wished would disappear. Most of all, she thought about that moment of terror when a gun had been pointed at her head for no reason except the color of her skin, and about how easily that moment could have ended differently. Tanya picked up her phone and texted Sergeant Vasquez, "I'll testify, whatever it takes." The reply came almost immediately. "I'll let the DA know. We'll be with you every step of the way." Tanya set down her phone and took a deep breath of the night air. She couldn't change what had happened to her. But maybe, just maybe, her one phone call could help ensure it wouldn't happen to someone. Housemite news of the investigation spread through the police department like wildfire. By Monday morning, every officer knew that Robert Harlow had been placed on administrative leave pending an internal affairs investigation. What most didn't know was the name of the complainant or the exact nature of the allegations, facts that Sergeant Vasquez had carefully kept confidential. But secrets had a way of leaking in a department where loyalty often outweighed protocol. Someone had accessed the complaint file and shared details with Harlow's closest allies on the force. By Tuesday, anonymous threats began appearing in Vasquez's departmental mailbox. Nothing explicit enough to trace, just notes with phrases like, "Watch your back and choose the right side." Vasquez tucked the notes into an evidence bag and added them to her growing file. If they thought they could intimidate her, they didn't. Know her very well. She was reviewing Officer Chen's supplemental statement when Captain Reynolds appeared in her doorway. Reynolds was an old-school cop, 25 years on the force and notorious for looking the other way when his favorite officers bent the rules. "Got a minute?" he asked, though his tone made it clear it wasn't really a question. "Of course, Captain." Vasquez closed the file on her desk. "What can I do for you?" Reynolds shut the door behind him and remained standing, using his height to look down at her. "I'm hearing some concerning things about your Harlow investigation." Such as, you're pushing too hard on a good officer, based on a civilian complaint that's probably exaggerated. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "We both know how these things go. People get pulled over, they get upset. Suddenly the officer was threatening them or using slurs. It's the easiest accusation in the book." Vasquez kept her face neutral. "Are you suggesting I shouldn't thoroughly investigate a complaint of officer misconduct?" "I'm suggesting you use some discretion, Diane. Harlow's got a clean record." 7 prior complaints isn't what I'd call clean," she interrupted. Reynolds waved a dismissive hand. "Unsubstantiated complaints. You know how it works. If we acted on every complaint, we'd have no officers left. This one's different." Vasquez chose her next words carefully. "There's compelling evidence." Something shifted in Reynolds' expression. "The recording. That's what this is about." So he knew. Someone had told him about Tanya's recording. Vasquez kept her voice even. "Among other things, yes. Officer Chen's statement also corroborates key elements of the complaint. Chen's young, inexperienced. She misread the situation. She's been on the force for 5 years, Captain, hardly a rookie." Reynolds sighed heavily, changing tactics. "Look, we all know Harlow can be intense, but he gets results. His arrest numbers are among the highest in the department. And have you looked at the demographics of those arrests?" Vasquez asked quietly. A flush crept up Reynolds' neck. "Are you calling one of my officers racist?" "I'm following the evidence, sir." "That's my job." Reynolds straightened up. "Just remember where your loyalties should lie, Sergeant. We're a family here." "My loyalty is to the badge and what it's supposed to stand for," Vasquez replied. "If Officer Harlow violated his oath and the law, that's on him, not on me for investigating it." After Reynolds left, Vasquez sat for a long moment, then picked up her phone. She needed to warn Tanya that the circle of those who knew about her complaint had widened, and she needed to accelerate the investigation before more interference could occur. 3 miles away, Tanya was in the middle of a parent-teacher conference when her phone vibrated with a text from Vasquez. "Need to talk, new developments, call when you can." The message sent a flutter of anxiety through her stomach, but she forced herself to focus on the parents sitting across from her, discussing their daughter's reading progress. It was another 40 minutes before she could step into the empty teacher's lounge and return the call. "What's happened?" she asked without preamble. "The investigation is facing some internal resistance," Vasquez said carefully. "Nothing we didn't expect, but I wanted you to be aware. Also, more people know about your complaint than should. I can't confirm who leaked it, but the circle is widening. Tanya sank into a chair. Does that mean, do they know my name? My address? Don't believe so, not yet, but we should assume it's possible. Vasquez's voice was steady, reassuring. I've arranged for additional patrols near your home, and I've spoken with the school resource officer at Jefferson Elementary. He'll be keeping an eye out during school hours. This is really happening, isn't it? Tanya said quietly. I knew there might be pushback, but it's the reality of challenging the system, Vasquez replied. But there's good news too. The DA has officially opened a criminal investigation based on your recording. They'll be working in parallel with our internal investigation. Tanya thought about what this meant. So even if the department tries to protect him, the criminal case can still proceed. Yes. And there's more. 2 of the previous complainants have agreed to give new statements. Your case has given them the courage to come forward again. A complicated mix of emotions washed over Tanya, fear about the widening circle of those who knew about her complaint, but also a sense of validation that her actions were already having ripple effects. What do I need to do? She asked. Now just be vigilant. Report anything unusual. Cars you don't recognize on your street, strange phone calls, anything, and the DA's office will be contacting you to schedule a formal deposition. After hanging up, Tanya sat in the empty teacher's lounge for several minutes trying to process everything. The small action she had taken, one phone call, had set in motion events that seemed to grow larger and more complex by the day. What had started as a terrifying traffic stop was now expanding into something that might actually change the department from within. She was still sitting there when the door opened and her colleague Frank Wilson walked in. Frank taught 5th grade and had been at Jefferson Elementary for nearly 20 years. Everything okay, Tanya? He asked, heading for the coffee maker. You look like you're a million miles away. Just thinking, she replied vaguely. Frank poured himself a cup of coffee and sat down across from her. Thinking pretty hard from the look of it. Tanya hesitated. She hadn't told anyone at school about the incident or the investigation, but suddenly she felt the need to share the burden with someone who knew her day-to-day life, not just the legal case she had become entangled in. Can I tell you something in confidence? She asked. Frank set down his cup. Of course, Tanya told him. Everything. The traffic stop, the gun pointed at her head, the recording, and now the dual investigations. Frank listened without interrupting, his expression growing increasingly troubled. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. I had no idea you were going through all this, he finally said. That's a lot to carry alone, Tanya. Feels that way sometimes, she admitted. I believe I'm doing the right thing, but it's scary, and it's getting complicated. Frank nodded slowly. My brother-in-law is a cop over in the 3rd district. He's one of the good ones. At least I've always believed so. But he talks sometimes about the pressure to stay quiet, to back up fellow officers no matter what. He looked at her directly. What you're doing takes real courage. Or foolishness, Tanya said with a small smile. No. Frank shook his head firmly. It's courage. And if there's anything I can do to help, even if it's just covering your recess duty when you need to take a call from the DA, you just say the word. The simple offer of support brought unexpected tears to Tanya's eyes. Thank you. 2 days later, Tanya sat in a conference room at the district attorney's office, giving her formal deposition about the incident. Assistant DA Patrick Hernandez recorded her statement, stopping occasionally to ask clarifying questions. The process was exhausting, reliving every moment of that night, explaining every detail, answering the same questions from slightly different angles to ensure her account remained consistent. Your recording is the linchpin, Hernandez explained when they finished. Without it, this would be much harder to pursue, but with it, we have a strong case for criminal charges. What charges exactly? Tanya asked. Assault with a deadly weapon, official misconduct, civil rights violations, and potentially hate crime enhancements based on the racial slurs captured in the recording. The gravity of these potential charges sank in. What's the likely outcome if he's convicted? Hernandez leaned back in his chair. If convicted on all counts, He's looking at a minimum of 5 years, possibly up to 15, depending on how the judge views the aggravating factors. Prison time, Tanya said quietly. Yes, this isn't just about losing his badge. What he did was criminal, Ms. Williams, and we intend to treat it as such. Meanwhile, Sergeant Vasquez was building her case for the internal investigation. She had obtained Harlow's complete personnel file, including performance reviews, training records, and use of force reports. A troubling pattern emerged. Multiple incidents where Harlow had used force during routine stops, particularly with minority subjects. His supervisors, including Captain Reynolds, had repeatedly signed off on these incidents without question. The technical analysis of Harlow's body camera provided the most damning evidence. Not only had he manually deactivated it before approaching Tanya's car, but forensic examination showed a pattern of malfunctions coinciding precisely with civilian complaints. It was too consistent to be coincidental. Officer Chen had provided a detailed statement confirming what she had witnessed that night. Despite pressure from certain colleagues, she hadn't wavered in her account. "I know what I saw," she told Vasquez during their follow-up interview. He had no justification for drawing his weapon. None. By the end of the week, Vasquez had compiled enough evidence to recommend termination and criminal referral, the strongest possible outcome for an internal affairs investigation. She submitted her report to the police chief, bypassing Captain Reynolds entirely. The chief, a career officer with political ambitions, read the report with growing concern. The evidence was damning, but firing an officer always created blowback from the union and certain segments of the department. On the other hand, the recording made it impossible to justify keeping Harlow on the force. If that audio ever became public, the department would face a public relations disaster. After consulting with the city attorney, the chief made his decision. Robert Harlow would be terminated effective immediately, and all evidence would be turned over to the district attorney for criminal prosecution. The news hit the department like a bombshell. Officers gathered in small groups discussing the unprecedented outcome in hushed voices. Some expressed shock that a fellow officer would actually face criminal charges. Others, particularly younger officers and officers of color, felt a quiet sense of vindication, as if a message had finally been sent that certain behaviors would no longer be tolerated. Tanya learned of the termination from Sergeant Vasquez, who called her personally to share the news. "It's just the first step," Vasquez cautioned. "The criminal case still has to play out, but he's off the force. He'll never wear a badge in this city again." "Thank you," Tanya said, emotion tightening her throat. "For believing me, for taking this seriously." "No," Vasquez replied. "Thank you for having the courage to come forward. We need more citizens like you if policing is ever going to change." That evening, as Tanya sat on her porch watching the sunset, she felt a complex mixture of emotions: relief that Harlow had been fired, apprehension about the criminal case ahead, and a growing sense that her one phone call had already accomplished something important. Her phone chimed with a text from Anthony. "Just heard the news." "So proud of you, sis." Tanya smiled and typed back. "One down, one to go. Trial next." The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. One phase had ended, another was about to begin, and Tanya Williams, 3rd grade teacher, was ready to see it through. 3 months passed before Robert Harlow's criminal trial began. 3 months during which Tanya's life had been irrevocably changed. Her name had become public when the indictment was filed, and overnight she had transformed from an anonymous 3rd grade teacher into the center of a case that had captured local media attention. Most of her colleagues at Jefferson Elementary had been supportive, with Principal Garcia making it clear that the school stood behind her. But there had been uncomfortable moments too. Parents who suddenly requested their children be moved to different classrooms, anonymous comments on news articles questioning her character, and one particularly frightening night when someone had driven past her house slowly, revving their engine before speeding away. Through it all, Tanya had continued teaching, finding solace in the routine of her classroom and the innocence of her students, who remained blissfully unaware of the controversy surrounding their teacher. To them, she was still just Ms. Williams, who helped with math problems and read stories with funny voices. On the first day of the trial, Tanya arrived at the courthouse to find a small crowd gathered outside. Some held signs supporting police, accountability, while others displayed messages backing our officers. News vans lined the street, reporters doing early morning stand-ups for their stations. Anthony met her at a side entrance, having arranged with court security to bring her in away from the cameras and protesters. He squeezed her hand as they walked through the metal detectors. "You ready for this?" he asked quietly. "As ready as I'll ever be," she replied. The courtroom was already filling up when they entered. Tanya spotted Sergeant Vasquez sitting in the second row behind the prosecution table, her expression professional but her eyes conveying silent support when they met Tanya's. Officer Chen was there too, sitting apart from the group of uniformed officers who had come to support Harlow. Harlow himself sat at the defense table, almost unrecognizable in a dark suit instead of his uniform. His attorney, an expensive-looking woman with sharp features and sharper eyes, leaned close to him, whispering something that made him nod slightly. Assistant DA Hernandez greeted Tanya and Anthony, guiding them to seats behind the prosecution table. "We'll call you as our first witness after opening statements," he explained. "Just tell the truth exactly as you remember it. The recording will do most of the work." The judge entered, and the courtroom rose. Judge Gloria Patterson, a veteran always of the bench with a reputation for no-nonsense efficiency, called the court to order and instructed the attorneys to begin their opening statements. Hernandez went first, his voice steady as he laid out the case against Harlow. "This isn't about making a mistake in the heat of the moment," he told the jury. "This is about an officer who deliberately turned off his body camera, approached a vehicle with his hand already on his weapon, escalated a routine traffic stop into a life-threatening situation, and used racial slurs while pointing his service weapon at an unarmed woman who had done nothing wrong. You will hear the defendant's own words, captured in a recording Ms. Williams had the foresight to activate. You will hear the fear in her voice as she faced the barrel of his gun, and you will hear the hatred in his." Harlow's attorney, Nancy Keller, countered with a defense built around the dangers of policing and the split-second decisions officers must make. "Officer Harlow has served this community for 8 years, putting his life on the line every day," she argued. "The prosecution will play a recording that captures one moment in time without the full context of what Officer Harlow perceived as threatening behavior. We will show that he acted according to his training when faced with what he genuinely believed was a dangerous situation." When it was time for Tanya to testify, she walked to the witness stand with her head held high, though her heart pounded in her chest. After being sworn in, she sat down and faced the courtroom, trying not to look directly at Harlow. Hernandez led her through her testimony gently but thoroughly, having her recount the events of that night in detail, how she had been driving home from a faculty meeting, how she had used her phone's emergency recording feature when pulled over as a precaution, how Harlow had approached with his hand already on his weapon. "And what happened next, Ms. Williams?" Hernandez asked. "He asked for my license and registration. When I reached for my purse to get them, he suddenly drew his gun and pointed it at me, yelling for me to put my hands up." "How did you feel in that moment?" Tanya took a deep breath. "Terrified. I thought I was going to die. I couldn't understand what was happening, or why he had his gun pointed at me." Hernandez nodded. "Your Honor, at this time I'd like to play the recording made by Ms. Williams during this encounter." The courtroom fell silent as the recording began to play. Tanya kept her eyes fixed on a point on the far wall, not wanting to watch the jury's reactions as they heard Harlow's voice escalate from aggressive to threatening, his use of racial slurs clear and unmistakable. When the recording captured him saying, "You people always think you can question everything," several jurors visibly flinched. After the recording ended, Hernandez had just a few more questions before turning Tanya over to the defense for cross-examination. Keller approached the witness stand with a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Ms. Williams, you testified that you activated your phone's recording feature as soon as you were pulled over. Is that correct?" Yes. And why would you do that if you weren't expecting trouble? If you didn't already have a bias against police? Officers? Objection, Hernandez called. Argumentative. Sustained, Judge Patterson ruled. Rephrase, counselor. Keller tried a different angle. Ms. Williams, had you had negative experiences with police officers before this incident? No, not personally, Tanya answered truthfully. Then why the recording? Why the immediate suspicion? Tanya met her gaze steadily. It wasn't suspicion. It was precaution. My brother is an attorney who has represented people in cases involving police misconduct. He advised all our family members to record interactions with police as a matter of routine safety. Keller's questioning grew more aggressive as she tried to suggest that Tanya had somehow provoked Harlow or misinterpreted his actions. But with the recording as evidence, there was little room to maneuver. When Keller attempted to question Tanya's character by bringing up a speeding ticket from 6 years earlier, Judge Patterson shut her down immediately. After Tanya stepped down, the prosecution called Officer Chen to the stand. Despite visible discomfort at testifying against a fellow officer, Chen's testimony was damning. She described arriving at the scene to find Harlow with his weapon drawn despite no apparent threat, confirmed that Tanya had been calm and cooperative, and stated unequivocally that the situation had not warranted drawing a service weapon under department guidelines. Sergeant Vasquez testified next, presenting evidence from the internal affairs investigation, the pattern of complaints against Harlow, his history of malfunctioning body cameras, and the technical proof that he had deliberately deactivated his camera before approaching Tanya's vehicle. As the trial progressed through its second and third days, 2 more witnesses took the stand. Previous complainants whose allegations against Harlow had been dismissed for lack of evidence. Their stories followed disturbing parallels to Tanya's experience. Routine stops escalated without provocation, racial slurs and threats, all without witnesses or recordings to corroborate their accounts. When the defense presented its case, Harlow took the stand in his own defense, claiming he had perceived a threat when Tanya reached for her purse. But under cross-examination by Hernandez, his story began to unravel. Officer Harlow, if you truly believed Ms. Williams was reaching for a weapon, why did you approach her vehicle with your hand already on your gun before she made any movements at all? Standard officer safety procedure, Harlow replied stiffly. And why did you deactivate your body camera before the stop? It was malfunctioning. Conveniently, just like the previous 7 times when complaints were filed against you. Harlow's face flushed. I don't recall. You don't recall deliberately turning off your camera to hide your actions? Just like you don't recall using racial slurs that we all heard clearly on the recording? Objection, Keller shouted, badgering the witness. Withdrawn, Hernandez said smoothly, but the damage was done. The jury had seen Harlow's reaction, had watched him squirm under questioning about facts clearly established by the evidence. On the 4th day, after closing arguments, the jury deliberated for just 3 hours before returning with their verdict. Sound. The count of assault with a deadly weapon, how do you find? Judge Patterson asked the foreperson. We find the defendant guilty, Your Honor. On the count of official misconduct? Guilty. On the count of civil rights violations? Guilty. On the hate crime enhancement? Guilty. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Harlow sat motionless, his face pale. Keller placed a hand on his arm, already preparing to discuss appeals. 2 weeks. Later, Tanya returned to the courthouse for Harlow's sentencing. Judge Patterson delivered a scathing assessment before announcing the sentence, 12 years in state prison. Mr. Harlow, you were entrusted with a badge and a weapon to protect and serve all citizens equally, she said. Instead, you abused that trust in the most egregious way possible, placing an innocent woman in fear for her life based solely on the color of her skin. Your actions not only harmed Ms. Williams, but damaged public trust in law enforcement as a whole. As Harlow was led away in handcuffs, Tanya felt no satisfaction, only a profound sense of closure. What had begun with one terrifying traffic stop had ended with a measure of justice that might have been impossible without her phone recording. Outside the courthouse, she met with Sergeant Vasquez, who had news to share. The department is implementing new policies as a direct result of your case, Vasquez explained. Mandatory disciplinary review for any officer with multiple complaints, regardless of whether they were substantiated. Automatic termination for any officer found to have deliberately disabled their body camera. And a new civilian oversight board with actual teeth. Will it make a difference? Tanya asked. It already has, Vasquez replied. 3 officers with patterns similar to Harlow's have been placed on administrative leave pending review, and applications for our community policing training program have doubled. Officers are paying attention. That evening, Tanya spoke at a community forum organized by her brother's law firm. The room was packed with people from all walks of life, united by concern about policing in their community. Standing at the podium, Tanya looked out at the diverse faces watching her, young and old across racial and economic lines. She thought about how differently her story might have ended without that recording. How many similar stories had ended tragically for lack of evidence. I'm not an activist, she began. I'm a 3rd-grade teacher who found herself in a situation no one should ever experience. What made my case different wasn't what happened to me. It was that I had proof of what happened. One phone call and one recording changed everything. She paused, looking directly at the audience. But change shouldn't depend on having a recording. It shouldn't depend on being lucky enough to have a second officer arrive who does the right thing, or an internal affairs sergeant willing to buck the system. Justice shouldn't be exceptional. It should be the rule. As she continued speaking, Tanya realized that her journey wasn't ending with Harlow's sentencing. It was transforming into something larger, a commitment to ensuring that her one phone call continued to create ripples of change throughout the system. She had never planned to become an advocate, but standing there, sharing her story with people who needed to hear it, Tanya Williams understood that sometimes the most powerful form of advocacy begins with simply telling the truth about what happened to you and making sure that others have the core